"We didn't know," began the Fraxian, his armored carapace form shaking, his body language giving off something I had never seen in a Fraxian before. Fear. And remorse. Fraxians are, or rather were, a proud warrior race. Their 3 fen tall average height, 3.5 meters in Terran measurement, tall insectoid forms. They most resemble what Terrans call a praying mantis. They were a loud species, full of fire and disdain for other races in the Federation. Their favourite saying was, "Those who can't fight are food." This saying alone forced many a war to surrender outright whenever a Fraxian fleet jumped into their systems demanding surrender. They did not see the difference between sentient forms and non-sentient. Meat was meat. This Fraxian was different. If their race had tear ducts, I could swear it was crying. It sipped from the drink I bought, and began its tale. "I was there, you know. I was there when we made first contact with the Terrans. We didn't know they were Terrans back then. We were scouting for new colony worlds when our sensors detected an unknown world in the Bibi Orasi system. A small primitive world. It was teeming with non-sentient life, lush vegetation and tall trees. Not ideal for our highs, but could possibly provide us more meat. Our tactical officer, Bren, laughingly said she detected a small fire on the southern region of the nearest forest, near a body of liquid you now call water. She said there were primitive forms nearby and using the fire to cook their food. Initial scans detected minimal technology. These were a backward race. They were no challenge. We approached their small dwelling under the full sun. We didn't care if they saw us. What could they do? Even without our beam weapons, we could easily gut them with our slightest flick of our claws. What happened next surprised all of us. Instead of running from the 5 of us who so brazenly approached them, they held their ground. Their long sticks had sharp rocks tied to their tips, and a few had raised them in a threatening gesture. Their hive leader, a female as our scans indicated, gestured for them to lower their spears and approached us. Us? Didn't she know who we were? Did she not realize she was beneath us? She surprised us even more by addressing me. Me? I who had led our swarm to multiple victories. I who had broken the Ursine worlds until they were scattered across the rim. How dare she even be in our presence without showing the slightest bit of terror? How dare she speak? I didn't understand what she said, but her sound annoyed me. I took her stick and thrust it through her chest with ease. She died with such a confused look on her face. She whispered something I didn't hear and fell silent. So ugly her face. Pale. No mandibles. Dark long fur flowing from the top of her head. Only 2 eyes. Disgusting. The rest of us made quick work of the rest, using our plasma blades to sever their limbs to stop them from running or killing them outright with our beamcasters. They died like cattle. Some begged for their lives, but that only enraged Bren. My hive sister tore its remaining 2 appendages off with her claws and let it bleed, moaning to his god from the sounds of it. I've seen other species do the same when this has happened to them. The last survivor fought. Even missing an upper appendage, it still managed to drive his stick into the soft joint in Cass's neck. It wasn't fatal, but it enraged Cassa so much she kicked it to the ground and stomped on it with her foot claw, tearing it almost in half. She immediately fell to the ground screaming, a high keening sound. Her distress pheromones almost sickening the rest of us. These creatures were poison. Their blood was poison. It was a sickening red colour that burned where it touched our carapaces. Cassa's foot had to be severed, and we hurried back to the ship, leaving the carnage behind. She never made it to the ship. She died screaming in pain, poisoned by the creature's blood. What greeted us on the ship was the face of madness. Our communications officer could barely speak the words. "Sister," she began. "I managed to look at the latest Federation update to see if they had any records of the creatures here, to see if they were edible. I found this instead." She put the report to the main screen, and I read. Newest member species, humans. Bipedal. Rim system. Trader race, non-threat. Peaceful. Aggression index, unknown. Unknown? That simply meant they had never fought before. If these were the same bipeds we just slaughtered, then they would be easy prey. Non-threat. Trader race. Their worlds would make excellent colony worlds for us. We had nothing to fear. Sister? Our science officer's query broke me from my reverie. Thoughts of a new species to conquer making me giddy with anticipation. "Sister," she began again. "I've gone over the readings of the site you just came from. The Terrans you encountered weren't fully mature. Speaking in our terms, they would have been just older hatchlings. Older children by galactic standard." Children? I suddenly felt a small chill in my thorax. I've seen species fight to the death when their young were threatened or injured. We just killed the young of a new species. How would they react? No matter. A weak race would be of little consequence. I smiled and looked at my crew, and saw the same look on their faces, mandibles clicking in anticipation. The communications officer's panel suddenly beeped an alarm, startling the rest of us. She checked the display and said, "I have detected a homing beacon from the site you were just in. It seems to have sent a vid stream to a ship in system. It's approaching us now." I sneered. "Scan it. If it's a Terran ship, then it won't be any threat. Just more prey for us." The tactical officer shared my sneer and began her scan. Her bravado was quickly replaced with confusion, then concern. "It doesn't register. It's like there's nothing there," she said with some alarm. A small, black ship appeared in orbit over the planet. Our sensors could only make out external readings and measurements. It was roughly the size of our ship and was running on an unknown power source. Our ship alarm suddenly went off, screaming off impending attack. "Sister, the ship has taken over all of our systems. They're reading all our data, weapons, star maps, even our historical records. It's tapped directly into our Hive data link. Impossible!" Our ship suddenly went dark. No power, no lights, no sound. The main screen came on and a Terran began to address us. It spoke in Galactic Common, the translator working to keep up with his words. An older, scarred face, wrinkled and with black and white fur growing out from the top of its mouth and down his chin. This didn't look like the young we had just slain. Its eyes were much darker, its stare unnerving me and my whole crew. It was like peering into something from the cold abyss, a look that a predator would have. The Terran spoke quietly, as if trying to rein in his emotions. "We know about you Fraxians from our Ursid friends. We refused to believe the tales of your atrocities until we saw what you'd done to our training class." His voice trailed off. "My daughter." His voice a sad, deadly whisper. "Her last vidstream alerted us to your presence, and the same vidstream is now being broadcast to the Federation holonet. Run home, insect. Tell your world of the hell to come. Tell them you brought death to your species." The Terran ship then fired something into our hull, and our ship came alive again. We rose to meet it in battle and fired our main guns. 3 beams of bright red burning through space to hit their ship directly. It would die. This weak species would prey. They were nothing, and this ship would soon be another felt prey for... The Terran ship was still on screen. No damage. Our most powerful beams hadn't even scorched their hull. Energy readings showed they hadn't even raised their shields. Our beams simply drained of their energy before ever reaching their ship. Their ship returned fire. Twin railguns firing multiple bursts in rapid succession. Railguns don't work like this. How could they cycle enough energy to fire multiple rounds in such a short time? Our shields held for the first shot, but the rest passed through like our shields weren't even there. Our once proud vessel was being cut into pieces and needed to retreat. It left a bad taste in my mouths, but we needed to report this to the Hive. Our long-range comms had never reactivated after our ship went dark, and there seemed to be odd malfunctions and errors starting to happen. We powered our jump drives and left the system, hoping we would make it home before the drive fell completely. I later found out that my leaders had taken the vidstream as a propaganda tool and cast it all over the Federation, declaring total war on the Terrans and threatening any race who would assist them. The human ambassador had only this cryptic reply to all of our threats. "Reap the whirlwind." Another weak threat. What does swelling wind have to do with war? How could moving air damage us? We later found out its true meaning. It didn't frighten the Terrans. It didn't call them into submission. It had the opposite effect. It made them even angrier. I later found out that all would have eventually been forgiven, if not for the vidstream being used the way it was. The way our leaders mocked the deaths of their children, and the way our people cheered it on like it was entertainment. I wish... The Fraxian took another deep gulp from his drink and continued. I wish our drives had failed. I wish we'd never linked with the main hive net. I didn't know of the human term poetic justice. We became the harbingers of death to our own people. That second shot into our ship's hull wasn't a normal weapon. It was a virus. As was the first shot. But whereas the first only took over our ship's computer systems, the second was what the Terrans call a worm. It devastated the hive net. All the malfunctions that happened on our ship multiplied by a factor of 100, then a 1000, as it infected the hive net. Communications went down. Life support on colonies failed. Food storage, mining, defenses, all malfunctioning. We were linked. We were one. Our greatest strength, now our greatest weakness. When we finally ended the worm's rampage, it only got worse. Our fleet, mostly untouched by the worm, hastily walked towards the Terran system, intent on destroying it completely, catching them off guard. We invaded their colony boss first, trying to deny their home system of the resources they denied us. Many of their people died as we fired on their cities from orbit. It was then we saw what the Terrans were capable of. The Third Hive Fleet positioned itself in the main jump point to the Terran worlds, while the Fifth Hive Fleet continued on to bombard and invade their Centauri Prime colony. The Third Fleet was first to bear witness to what the Terrans truly are. It frightens even the strongest Federation worlds even to this day. We were so focused on their main colony that we never noticed a small Terran fleet jumping to the edge of the Centauri Prime system, way beyond any known jump point. 5 ships, a large dreadnought and 4 smaller frigates. When we noticed them, it was too late. We laughed and thought they had no weapons that could reach us at that range. Even the longest range missiles we had couldn't reach that far. The dreadnought moved slowly, and the other ships looked so small we thought they were no threat at all. We would cut them down as they approached us, but they never approached. They positioned themselves into a firing formation, with the main dreadnought in the center. It was then we realized what they were doing, and what powered their fleet. Point singularities. Black holes. These were the suffered nightmare for any species. Even we had marked off where they existed, so we could avoid getting too close. These ships were powered by them. The Terrans had taken the most powerful, most vicious power in the galaxy, and enslaved it, like some pack animal. The dreadnought fired 1 shot. An almost invisible beam sped towards us. Invisible to our eyes, but our sensors showed us the true horror approaching us. Energy readings spiked. Gravimetric readings grew and leapt off the charts. Ships were pulled together, as if caught in a strong wake. The Third Fleet, clustered as it was our standard combat tactic, suddenly found itself slamming into each other as ships lost power and maneuvering thrusters failed. Smaller ships and fighters on the edge of the formation desperately tried to escape the growing dark mass in the middle of the fleet, as the very fabric of reality bent into impossible shapes and angles. Nothing worked. The entire Third Fleet, over 10,000 ships, were folded into the size of a small sphere in a matter of seconds. The few that did get away were quickly dispatched by the smaller ships in the Terran fleet before they walked to Centauri Prime. The black hole that had formed so quickly dissipated as quickly as it had formed, leaving only an eerie silence over the rest of our comm channels. We all felt something that we hadn't felt before, an emotion so alien to us we had no term for it in our native language. Fear. The Fifth Fleet fared no better. Had I been leading it that day, I would have died. Instead, I, like the rest of my people, could only watch what happened with growing fear. The fleet reached Centauri Prime, as the Terrans named it, and fired on the planet. It did nothing but create fires and put deep craters in a few continents. The Terrans had created intricate underground hives that withstood our fiercest beams and missiles. The Fifth Fleet was known for its ferocity in battle. It was they that finally broke the Earth's resolve and decimated their homeworld into nothing. We swarmed around their system, intent on flooding them until we choked off any resistance before it could organize. The Fifth Fleet launched their troop pods, and we darkened the skies as the pods filled them, each pod landing and deploying our fiercest warriors. They hadn't seen what the ship's crew had seen. If they did, they might have been more prepared for what happened next. The initial mass charge to what we thought was their main spaceport got bogged down when they ran into traps laid by the humans. Explosive devices they called mines. Some exploded with such a force, they sent our heaviest ground vehicles flying or tipped them over like a hatchling with its first toy. Other mines exploded and spat small, steel spheres directly into our columns, causing even more havoc. The spheres were dipped in Terran blood. Any not killed outright lay screaming on the ground, their limbs clawing at their thoraxes, mouths gasping and foaming. The survivors of this initial attack then saw the Terran line, or what they thought was the Terran line. Our optics detected a few Ursine troops mixed in with the Terrans, but they were manning mobile railguns that fired rounds that tore through us like we weren't even there. Some exploded midway, scattering sharp metal and impaling both ground troops and vehicles alike. The charge was slowing, our mass working against us. New horror gripped us as they charged us, as we tried to reorganize and meet their charge. Their atmospheric fighters screamed ahead of the charging Terran army and dropped something on us called napalm. The fires never stopped burning. It burned us in our own chitin. Our vehicles turned into cooking stoves that boiled their occupants in their own juices. When the humans finally reached us, we were not organized to meet them. They tore into us as savagely as any Ursine ever did. Limbs were severed. Humans who bled were using their own blood as weapons, flinging their blood onto us and condemning any hit touch to an agonizing death. Those that were spared this fate soon realized that the humans me and my crew encountered were truly just children. These were their adults, born and bred for war. Stronger, faster, and full of a bloodlust that would never be sated as long as even one of our hives still lived. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they used them as clubs. When those clubs broke, they used their bare hands. The larger of their species tearing our best troops limb from limb, and celebrating the courage of wanting more. The Fifth Fleet swarm, the pride of the hive world, running from angry Terran predators like the weakest of prey. The vidstream showed this. Once proud warriors reduced to fleeing animals. The terror on their faces unmistakable. It was as if we could all sense their distress pheromones, even across the breadth of the entire galaxy. None of them ever made it off planet. The Terrans and Ursids had synthesized the Terran blood into a gaseous form and had sprayed it into the atmosphere after our troops had landed. It was unnoticeable at first, just a soft tickle in our stomachs, nothing more. But the more we breathed it in, the worse we felt. By the time the troops had retreated, they were already dying or dead from too much exposure to this new weapon. Before you ask why we never asked our ships to help, or why they didn't, it's because they couldn't. Those smaller vessels that had been escorting the Dreadnought had arrived in system and engaged the 5th High Fleet at point-blank range. These weren't escorting the Dreadnought was escorting them. This was another terrible weapon created by the Terrans. Surviving Phyraxians later named these ships Silent Death for what they could deliver so quietly, so efficiently. Our sensors couldn't detect them. The dark ships appeared amidst our fleet as though from nowhere and fired railguns into our flagship, turning it into a burning pyre in the middle of space. Before our ships could react, a signal jammed all their systems and they fell silent. When they reactivated, the crews found they were no longer in control. Some ships lost life support, and their atmosphere was vented into space so violently, crew members were sucked into the vacuum. Other ships found themselves targeting each other and firing volley after volley until they had destroyed one another. Their vis streams broadcast by the Terrans, showing the terror inside, as each one of their crews scrambled to regain control, and then desperately running to their escape pods when they realized nothing could be done. But even there they found no respite. The pods failed to activate, or had their life support also malfunction. Those that managed to launch found themselves adrift with no power, save the one small screen in their pod replaying our leader's speech, decrying the humans as weak, and promising a swift victory. The Phyraxian paused again. It drank slowly, its body language conveying the fear that gripped it as it continued. I'd seen these ships before. It was the first Terran ship we'd ever encountered, all the way back on that unnamed world that started all this. One ship had crippled the hive nest so badly, we lost billions without the Terrans ever firing a shot. The fall we saw in Centauri Prime showed us that we were helpless before an angry beast that would swallow my people whole. What happened to the rest of the Terran fleet, you ask? I hadn't said a word, but nodded nonetheless. It shuddered and continued. What wasn't broadcast was that the main Terran fleet had cut through our defensive lines and now orbited our main hive world, our cradle world where we began. Did I say cut through? That's wrong. The Terrans decimated all our fleets. Our numbers meant nothing. Our strength meant nothing. Millions of hive ships reduced to a memory in an instant. If not for their point singularity weapons or those silent ships that enslaved and destroyed our greatest ships with ease, we may have had a chance. Food wells were poisoned with the aerosol Terran blood. Our colonies eradicated, as the Terrans used these weapons to destroy each planet with precision. They cut us out of our vassal systems, while leaving our slave worlds untouched. In systems where only Phyraxians lived, they turned their point singularity weapons towards that system's sun, and wiped the entire system from memory. By the time they'd reached the hive world, we were a dead species. We knew it. The galaxy knew it. Had we not been so prideful in the beginning, maybe other sentient species would have stepped in and maybe quelled the Terran's bloodlust. Perhaps even spoke words on our behalf, crying for leniency. But there were none. We had treated them all with such disdain. We saw them all as slaves to be conquered or food to be eaten. None would mourn our passing. Some even rejoiced at the prospect of it. Our queens tried too late to beg for mercy by contacting the Terran fleet and asking for terms of surrender. The chilling answer they got was only 2 words. Die screaming. The Terrans dropped aerosol bombs into our hive world's atmosphere. Those not killed by the poison soon found that they could not escape. Any ships on the ground were malfunctioning and unable to launch. Those that did were shot out of the sky before they even made orbit. Most of us died that day. The few of us that survived are scattered throughout the galaxy, pariahs wherever we go, still hunted by the Terrans who are cheered on by the rest of the galaxy. I live in fear now, not knowing when a Terran will show in my life. The Phyraxian took yet another sip from his drink and swayed unsteadily. What's happening? He stammered, slumping back in his seat. I removed my hood and revealed my face. Brown and white fur, a stubby snout, a typical Ursine face. I spoke. Well, my friend said the synth poison would take a while to show any effects. I guess he was right. The Phyraxian looked confused. Poison? Friend? What friend? Who are you? Why, the poison you've been slowly drinking the entire time we've been here. That synthetic blood really dulled your senses, though if you couldn't tell a nursing was sitting so close to you. As for who I am, nobody of note. Just a friend of the man whose daughter you killed all those years ago. Do you remember Bibi Arusi? That planet was a training camp for the young men and women who would lead the Terrans once their time had come. They were there that day to learn the ancient survival skills of their people. Do you remember him? I opened a viz screen from my wrist communicator, and a picture flashed open. A Terran with an older face, scarred and more wrinkled now. His fur growing from the top of his mouth and down his chin more grey than dark. Fraxian, I said. Let me introduce you to General Vasily Andreyev, commander of the Terran Eland Fleet, Electronics Intelligence Fleet, the silent death you and your people so feared. The Fraxian's eyes widened with realization as he tried to speak, but instead just slumped weakly back into his chair. The general spoke. Thank you, old friend. I would never have found this one if not for your help. The general's dark eyes fixed on the Fraxian. You murdered my daughter when she offered you a greeting of peace and welcome. She was still learning Galactic Common and wanted to learn it without the use of a translator. She never knew what she was dealing with when she met you. She saw the best in every species she met. She thought every species had a measure of good in them, but she never knew your kind existed. The last words she said in this life I will remember forever, and so will you in your last moments. Ja bilva neprava, otec. Ja bila neprava. I was wrong, father. I was wrong. As the last Fraxian slumped dead on the floor, I saw my friend Funny lose all the emotions he'd pent up all these years. He cried freely now, not caring who saw him. He cried for the loss of all the lives in that brief but terrible war, for the loss of his daughter, but mostly for the loss of the bright dream his daughter had, that every sentient had a spark of good inside them.